was born with neither father nor mother to my name, an orphaned ward, weak in health but strong in spirit, entrusted by fate to the care of the reeds. My earliest memories are of the red brick house at Gateshead Hall, where I, Jane Eyre, lived among my Aunt Reed and her children, the cruel John, beautiful Eliza, and gentle Georgiana. My aunt's disdain for me was palpable. I was poor, plain, and unwelcome, breakfasting at a corner table, sleeping in a cold chamber, and always reminded that I had less claim to the family hearth than any of the servants. One day, at 9 years old, I was accused unjustly of turning my cousin John into the red-headed cow by bleeding his nose, though it was I who was defenseless before his bullying strike. Branding me a liar, Aunt Reed sentenced me to the Red Room, rarely used and always cold, Aunt's own chamber of dread, with icy walls, crimson draperies, and a large death mask of Grandpa Reed watching from above. It was a place of terror. The door was locked, the candle guttered, and I paralyzed before the portrait of the stern, long-dead patriarch. No one came. I fainted from fear and was found hours later, laying across a chair, sobbing as though buried alive. It was there I swore to rise above my vulnerabilities, telling myself, I will keep the law given by God, sanctioned by man. I will hold to the principles received by me when I was sane and not mad as I am now. When I recovered, Mr. Lloyd, the kindly apothecary employed by the Reeds, admonished Aunt Reed. He suggested I be sent away to school. Aunt agreed with a huff. Transfer her to Lowood directly. I wash my hands of her. Thus, a few months later, I bade farewell to Gateshead, comforted only by Mr. Lloyd's warm smile and the silent promise that freedom awaited beyond those forbidding walls. Lowood Institution was nothing like Gateshead. Cold, austere, and pitiless, it catered to destitute orphans and the poor, under a strict regimen presided over by Mr. Brocklehurst, a clergyman whose piety masked cruelty. On my first night, I shared a chamber with other girls in coarse cotton dresses. We slept on narrow cots in a long dormitory whose windows were frigid, allowing glacial drafts. Mr. Brocklehurst's daily visits comprised hypocritical lectures on humility, enforced servitude, and constant reminders of our sins. He singled me out as a liar child, ordering me to stand on a stool so that my shame would be visible to the entire school. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but I would not shrink from his falsehoods. My resolve hardened that night. I must be brave, truthful to my own conscience, and rise above their judgments. At Lowood's meager refectory, we broke our fast on black bread and a drizzle of thin porridge. A single meager bowl of pea soup for dinner. Cold was our constant companion. We wore flimsy garments, and the head matron, Miss Scatcherd, wielded her cane with merciless severity. Despite the grim conditions, friendships blossomed. Helen Burns, tall, scholarly, and bearing an air of quiet resignation, became my closest friend. She suffered injustice without complaint, reciting scripture under her breath and advancing the notion that we must accept suffering as ordained by God. When Miss Scatcherd accused Helen of insubordination, Helen had calmly refused to degrade another pupil. Helen endured the lashes' sting with serene forgiveness. I admired her, even if I did not share her saintly acceptance of torment. Tragedy struck in the harsh winter. Consumption spread through the school like wildfire. The straw bedding, crowded dormitories, and lack of fresh air created a breeding ground for disease. Helen fell ill. Her cough deepened. Her breaths became labored. I watched helplessly as the once vibrant spirit wasted away. One austere morning, Helen invited me to her bedside and spoke softly. "Be calm, dear Jane. Bear witness to my cheerfulness. I hope I am resigned, and that my life and death are equal in God's sight." Her eyes sparkled with conviction, even as her strength drained away. I wept as Helen whispered her final prayer and passed from life at 15. I knelt beside her and kissed her cold hands, vowing never to forget her gifts of friendship, courage, and faith. She was buried beneath the harsh earth of Lowood's icy grounds, her brief life illuminating greater truths about endurance and forgiveness. Soon after, the shocking news arrived. Mr. Brocklehurst's library was stocked with luxury, his table overflowing with fine fare, all while we starved. Public disgrace followed. He was removed, and the school's conditions improved. We were fed better meals, clothed in warmer garments, and sunlight streamed once more through clean windows. Under the care of the benevolent superintendent, Miss Temple, Lowood transformed from a prison into a place of learning. I flourished in my studies, particularly English composition and arithmetic. Miss Temple recognized my aptitude. "You have a mind of your own, Jane Eyre, and a keen desire to know more." She encouraged me to read in broad volumes, to dispute ideas, and sharpen my reasoning. Under her guidance, I discovered that knowledge was a path to independence and self-respect. At age 18, I passed my final examinations with high marks and accepted the position of a teacher at Lowood, my first step toward self-sufficiency. Though I had grown in usefulness and confidence at Lowood, a yearning for fresh horizons stirred within me. I resolved to leave the institution where I had been both punished and enlightened, seeking service as a governess. With my modest savings, £12, clutched in hand, and Miss Temple's blessing upon my departure, I set out for Millcote, a village near Eshton. There, I had agreed to tutor a young French girl. The poor household, run by a Mrs. Illage, was shabby and cold, with meager furnishings and a crumbling hearth. I found the position unsatisfactory. My pupil lay listless, her governess duties meager, and the family's housekeeper infinitely more suited to caring for children than I. Day after day I taught only a few words of French, reviewed sporadic lessons of grammar, and some hours were filled hand-knitting mittens for warming fieldsmen. I felt the walls closing in. My spirit screamed for escape. One bleak March morning, Mrs. Illage brought me the unexpected letter, a proposition to become governess at Thornfield Hall, a grand estate owned by Mr. Edward Rochester. The household there needed a teacher for young Adele, a lively French girl of 8. I accepted at once. The chance for broader duties and a warmer home beckoned. I boarded a coach to Thornfield. Mist-cloaked fields slipped by, and my heart throbbed with nervous excitement. Arriving at the gate, I rang the bell. A tall manservant in livery led me along a gravel path to the great hall, a 3-story mansion, its facade weathered red brick, framed by oaks whose bare arms stretched across the gray sky. The servant, Mr. Fairfax, the butler, ushered me to the drawing room, where I waited. The great hearth lay cold, the rugs thin, yet a cluster of books on a side table suggested intellectual tastes. Adele soon appeared, a bright-eyed child wearing a linen frock. She rushed into my arms, placing her small hand within mine. Before long, a low rumble of hoofbeats announced a horse at the door. Mr. Rochester leaped from his steed, tall, dark-haired, with piercing eyes eyes that seemed at once fiery and guarded. He offered me a curt nod, a nod that felt like a silent question. "You are Jane Eyre, governess?" His voice was strong, unusually deep. I replied with formal composure, "Yes, sir." He shook my hand briefly, stiffened with propriety, then strode into the hall, leaving me puzzled by his abrupt manner. Over supper, Mr. Rochester's conversation was laconic but intriguing. He asked little of my Lowood upbringing, inquiring instead about my lessons and my salary. He declared my remuneration, £30 a year, would secure me comfort. Warmed by the crackling fire and the gentle company of Adele, I felt satisfaction replacing my initial trepidation. When he bade me good night, his eyes flickered with curiosity, as though measuring my soul. My quarters lay on the second floor, a comfortable room furnished with a narrow bed, a small writing desk, and a window that looked onto the lawn. Adele's schoolroom occupied the first floor, a bright room where I taught her reading, writing, arithmetic, and French. Each morning I rose at dawn to awaken Adele. We took our lessons at a small table beneath the wisteria-laden window. I was fond of Adele's spirited questions and determined nature. She called me Mademoiselle Jane and sang little French lullabies at dusk, bringing me comfort I had never imagined possible. Mr. Rochester appeared sporadically. He attended to his affairs in the library at all hours. Sometimes I heard his voice reading aloud passages of Goethe or Shakespeare. Whenever our eyes met, I sensed the weight of secrets behind his gaze. On one walk across the grounds, he halted at a patch of flowering woodbine, remarking solemnly, "These blossoms fade quickly, like pleasure that comes too soon." I looked at him curiously, but he shrugged and walked on, leaving me to wonder at the depth of his melancholy. Thornfield contained mysteries. There were odd sounds at night, hysterical laughter echoing from a distant corridor, as though some mad woman's voice rang behind hidden doors. In the north wing, 3 locked doors always lay padlocked with iron keys. One evening, while awaiting Mr. Rochester in the drawing room, I heard a sudden shriek upstairs. I rushed to the landing, but no footfall followed. Later, Adele's music teacher, an Italian woman, Madame Lefebvre, told me to ignore the madness in the house. I soon learned that servants believed Thornfield roused ghosts and kept its own secrets, but no one would speak openly. I pressed Mr. Fairfax. His face paled, and with averted gaze he shook his head. I know nothing, Miss Eyre, only that my master has business in London, and that the north wing is long abandoned. Intrigued and unsettled, I forced myself to set the rumors aside. I had career and duty before me, and I would not be frightened by shadows on the walls. A month after my arrival, I awakened one night to the smell of smoke. I sprang from bed and, with only my nightdress and bare feet, raced down the stairs. Torch in hand, I burst into the drawing room and saw a small flame flickering near a cluster of books placed carelessly before the hearth. While I groped for the poker, the fire leaped toward an antique portrait above the mantel. Horrified, I seized the tapestry that hung before it and beat at the flames until they succumbed to my efforts. My lungs burned with each breath of smoke-laden air. Suddenly, a stern voice commanded, "Jane, lower the curtain." I obeyed, and the flames receded, leaving a blackened wall in the hearth. By then, Mr. Rochester appeared, his face grim with gratitude. He carried a flask of brandy to my lips as I stumbled from the smoke-filled room. "You brave, fearless girl," he murmured, pressing my arm. I found courage surging in my veins. It was only instinct, sir. Earlier that same evening, I had snuffed out the fire almost alone, yet Rochester insisted on proposing that without my actions, the entire house might have been destroyed. He vowed to reward and protect me. I knelt before him in gratitude, and he helped me to my chamber. That night, his admiration for my calm courage found a new expression in his eyes. Despite the lingering soot on my cheeks, I felt more alive than ever. In the weeks that followed, my relationship with Mr. Rochester gradually changed. He invited me to his side in the library, inquiring into my reading. "What think you of Wordsworth's sonnets?" he asked one afternoon. "I find them profound and consoling, sir," I answered. His eyes softened. "You have a keen mind, Jane. I have surmised as much." When I inquired about his secrets, he only half laughed. "All in good time, Mademoiselle Jane. We often walked together on the terrace overlooking the valley, Adele skipping at our heels, birdsong overhead, he speaking of his older travels in the West Indies. I, in turn, revealed my Lowood past, but never the shame of my orphan life at Gateshead. He listened with empathy, his hand resting on my shoulder as though bridging our differences. One autumn evening, he asked me to join him at church in the nearby village. Inside the modest building, candles flickered against high stained glass. Mr. Rochester knelt before me. "Jane, why do you not trust yourself to a higher power? I find myself in need of your counsel." I offered gentle words of comfort drawn from my lessons, and, moved by my sincerity, he escorted me home. As we crossed the lawn under a bright harvest moon, he said softly, "Jane, I suspect my heart is not untouched by you. When you read to Adele, she calls you her mother. I envy that bond, but in my soul, I recognize a new bond to you, Jane. Will you sit by me?" I felt an electric thrill. "Sir, I will sit by you so long as my presence brings no shame." The bond between us deepened that winter. One December morning, the sky gray and low, Mr. Rochester requested my company beneath the great chestnut tree on Thornfield's grounds. Its broad arms stretched above us. The first snowflakes fell, dusting the frozen grass. Adele played near the roots while we stood silently. He took my gloved hand. "Jane, I love you more than life. I have never loved except here, in this cold heart, a strange heat now stoked by your eyes and your unflinching soul. Will you marry me?" My heart faltered. This dark, brooding gentleman of mystery, whose very presence both frightened and fascinated me, now asked to unite our lives. Pride and caution warred within me, but I trusted my own feelings. "Yes," I whispered, "I accept." His expression transformed from solemnity to bright relief. He drew me close, murmuring, "You have lifted me from my solitude. Forever I shall be grateful." Adele ran between us, hiding behind my skirts, giggling at our flushed faces. Yet in that bliss, I felt a pang. There were truths he withheld. The fire in his loft seemed distant now, but his eyes betrayed worry, even as he kissed me tenderly. I resolved not to pry. My love would endure even unknown burdens. We walked back toward Thornfield under a canopy of frosted boughs, two souls pledged to each other, unbroken by secrets still concealed. In early winter, as snow crusted Thornfield's paths, my wedding day dawned bright and still. Adele fastened her black hair with ribbons, her small fingers trembling with excitement as we prepared for the ceremony. Mr. Rochester, garbed in formal attire, met me in the library. He stood tall, his dark eyes warmed by anticipation. Beneath the stalls of the great Thornfield Hall, adorned with holly and flickering candles, the curate awaited. I, cloaked in simple white muslin, strode down the aisle to his side. My heart bristled with both joy and a prickle of foreboding. I scarcely knew why. The first two vows were pledged. I, Edward Fairfax Rochester, take thee, Jane Eyre, to be my wedded wife. And I answered, I take thee, Edward Rochester, to be my wedded husband. As he lifted my hand to place the ring upon my finger, a sharp cry shattered the hush. A stranger burst through the wide hall doors, an officer from Somersetshire, his uniform mud-spattered, breathing heavily. He spoke to Mr. Rochester in urgent whispers. Confusion swept the assembly. Then Mr. Rochester, pallid beneath his dark brows, turned to me and said, Madam, this person claims I have a wife living. My promised marriage is void. My knees buckled. How could this be? Stunned, I watched as he turned to the startled curate and confessed that he had indeed married another, a wife who yet lived. At once my veil felt like a funeral pall. Though all eyes bore upon me, the Reeds, Adele, the servants, I refused to faint. I stood stiffly, uttering a frozen regret. Then let this ceremony be ended forever. Without further words, I turned and left Thornfield's cavernous hall, my heart battered by betrayal. That night, I fled Thornfield with nothing but the shawl Adele had given me. I boarded the first coach eastward with only half a crown in my pocket. The frosty wind bit my face, erasing traces of my tears as I journeyed into darkness. When the coach reached Marsh End, I found myself upon a desolate moor, the hedges leafless and sway of wind hollow. I wandered, uncertain of direction. My clothes, thin as they were, did nothing to protect me from the cold. Food and shelter grew imperative. I walked until my feet blistered, my breathing shallow in the icy air. At last, I espied a modest thatched cottage beside a turn in the lane. Moor House, home of the river's siblings. Exhausted, I knocked. A tall, grave man with deep-set gray eyes, St. John Rivers, opened the door. Behind him stood his sister Mary, her features bright with curiosity, and another sister, Diana, with a gentle smile. I begged for a morsel of bread and a drink of water. Despite their own meager poverty, they ushered me in, offering blankets and a warming fire. While I slept on their humble settle, they whispered among themselves, who was I to arrive so shabbily clad, with no explanation? In the morning, St. John insisted I accompany them to the nearby village schoolroom to resume my aspect of a teacher, offering me a place to rest, but forbidding me to mention Thornfield. During that first day, St. John assigned me chores: convey firewood for the hearth, fetch water at dawn, teach local children reading and arithmetic. Without rest, I rose at dawn, teaching young ember-eyed scholars at the humble school hut. By dusk, I returned to Moor House hungry. The river's siblings provided only oat porridge and bitter herbs. Still, I accepted with gratitude, my spirit sustained by dignity. Yet in the back of my mind, questions throbbed. Why had Rochester concealed a wife? What fate now awaited me? Over the next week, I confided in no one about my past and concealed the cause of my destitution. But the river's siblings, St. John, Diana, and Mary, sensed I was of gentle birth. One evening, after supper of hard biscuits and weak tea, St. John drew me aside. "You are no mere pauper, Jane Eyre," he said quietly. "I have seen letters among your few possessions bearing a Bradford postmark. Bradford is my home. We, Anne, Mary, Diana, and I, are siblings. Our father and mother died at sea. We were placed in care. We have acquired only a small inheritance from our late Uncle Oliver, but yours, if you have a claim, may far exceed ours." At these words, I felt tears of confusion and relief. I had been orphaned and dispossessed at 9, believing I had no kin. Could there truly be a family lost to me? The next morning, St. John presented me with a letter from Jane Eyre's senior cousin, John Eyre of Madeira, confirming that I was the sole heir to a vast fortune, £10,000. Upon our uncle's passing, his widow had renounced all claim, leaving the entirety to me. Thus, my poverty ended before I realized it. My heart pulsed at the knowledge. With money, I could rescue Thornfield's legacies, or at least free Adele's future. Yet guilt settled like a stone. How to claim this wealth while Rochester had wronged me? Over days, the Rivers family welcomed me into their circle. Diana and Mary tended to my wounded heart, offering gentle sympathy. St. John, a dour luminary at Oxford, asked if I would join him as a missionary's wife and accompany him to India. He praised my intellectual gifts and moral stamina. "I see Eden's tears in you. God has graced your soul. Marry me, and together let us save souls in Hindustan." His proposal lacked warmth, offered more as duty than affection. I admired his devout zeal, but could not love him. I declined, politely but firmly. Sir, I cannot sacrifice love for your ideal. God did not make me for India. My heart belongs to another. At his next serious glance, I sensed disappointment more than anger. He turned away, muttering something of divine will. Weeks passed. I taught dutifully, my mind shifting daily between hope for reconciliation with Rochester and a dawning conviction that I must follow conscience. St. John carefully observed me. One day, he approached me beside Morehouse's thatched wall, earnest as ever. Jane, our shared blood demands concord. I have applied to be the curate at Morton in Yorkshire, adjacent to our inherited property. I propose we share rooms, our inheritance supporting the church and local school. You would be as a sister to me. We would serve together. If you are faithful to me in all things, patience, prayer, obedience, you will find a worthy domain. Again, I felt admiration for his drive, but repulsion at the prospect of living as a sister, mere inches from his austere demeanor. I gently declined. St. John, my talents are not meant for your missionary vocation. I must follow my own path. His look hardened, and he stooped from his lofty supposition. Shortly thereafter, word arrived that Thornfield Hall had burned, fully razed by flames. No one knew from what cause. Salvageable walls remained, but the grand chambers and library lay in smoking ruin. I closed my eyes, imagining Rochester trapped within, too late to escape. I felt guilt. I had fled without a backward glance. I resolved to learn the truth and act, whatever it might cost me. I departed Moor House at dawn in February, with a letter of introduction from St. John's acquaintance at the village inn, planning to seek shelter in York, and then continue to Thornfield's ruins. I walked 2 days to the railway terminus. Then a carriage carried me north, past bleak fens and sleepy hamlets, until at last I saw Bath towards the southwest. At York, I boarded a stagecoach bound for Haymarket, alighting at a small village overlooking Thornfield's grounds. The scene that unfolded before me, miles of burnt timbers smoldering beneath a pale gray sky, the once proud red brick facade lay charred, the courtyard clogged with rubble. The northern wing, where a madwoman had been confined, rose as a charred husk, its windows dark and gaping. No smoke drifted now, only lingering ashes and bird song. I wandered among the ruins until a figure approached. Mr. Rochester on crutches. His left hand gripped a brace. His right arm was bandaged. A patch covered his left eye. His gait was slow but determined. His face was drawn and sunken, his hair streaked with gray. But as he saw me, his expression shifted from shock to something softer, more relieved. "Jane," he whispered, placing a finger under my chin. "You returned." I rushed to him, clutching his knees. "Edward, are you unhurt? Where are the servants?" He raised a trembling finger to hush me. "Madame, my wife Bertha, perished in the fire. I barely escaped. I was bound in my room. I could not rescue her. Since then, my life has been punishment." His voice quivered. "For years I was blind to her madness. My pride kept me silent. When her violence destroyed Thornfield, I was set free, yet maimed. I saw bruises upon his wrists and leg. Jagged scars crisscrossed his face. I had given you a life of lies," he continued. "But now it is truth I offer. Our marriage may now proceed. This estate is offered as your inheritance, and I have learned to prize affection over pretense. Will you, Jane Eyre, marry me again?" Tears sprang unbidden to my eyes. I sat upon the ashes of Thornfield, took his arms, and said solemnly, "Edward, I have loved you since our first meeting. Despite all, I forgive the past. Yes, I will marry you." His one good eye shone as he pressed my hand to his lips. In the months that followed, I nursed Mr. Rochester's wounds at Ferndean Manor, a secluded estate deep within the West Sussex woods. Burned by the fire, the house was rebuilt modestly, a 2-story dwelling with sheltered arbors and a single drawing room warmed by a stately hearth. My old server, Hannah, now cared for Adele, who attended a local boarding school. The memory of Thornfield faded as Mr. Rochester and I lived quietly. He, once restless and commanding, now moved with gentle deliberation, reading to me passages of scripture and conversation. I, ever watchful, braided his long hair and bathed his wounded arm under the morning sun. Ferndean's small orchard lent fruit each autumn. The children of the village gathered beneath the apple trees to hear me read stories of heroes and romance. Mr. Rochester offered them coins, while I taught them the letters they might never master in charity. On Sundays, we attended a modest church in Hay, where our vows were celebrated anew by the kindly vicar, acknowledging our marriage under law and under God, a union blessed by truth and by suffering. Though his eyes were now misty, he spoke with a gentler tone, often praising my unwavering spirit. Jane, you are my guide and solace. Without your courage, I would have perished in flames of pride and folly. I smiled back, running my fingers across the coarse patch of beard upon his chin. Our love, once tested by betrayal, now grew deeper for the wounds we bore. As I knelt by his bedside to read from Shakespeare, my bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. He closed his eyes and murmured, "You are my infinite." One late spring afternoon, word arrived that St. John Rivers, newly installed as curate at Morton, lay gravely ill at Moor House. Diana and Mary had nursed him, but consumption crept in around his lungs. Seeing Mrs. Eyre's name upon a letter from the Vicar of Hay, they begged my presence. We dared not announce our arrival. Rather, Adele and I traveled by coach to Marsh End. There, beneath the ivied walls of Moor House, I saw the lips of the sisters pale with anxiety. Reparations were minor. Diana's eyes brimmed with tears. Mary clutched my hand with trembling relief. I learned that St. John had insisted I be his wife to take our joint inheritance to India. His motive was sincere affection, misguided by religious fervor. But upon my refusal, his soul turned inward. He labored in the village church, preaching sermons even as his body frail with fever. When he saw me, recognition wrested him from delirium. He whispered, "Jane, you, curse fate, I thought you wed?" I knelt at his bedside. "No, dear friend, I found my true destiny elsewhere. Forgive me." He nodded, a tear escaping his graying lashes. "You have done right. My heart, though broken, finds peace in your smile." At sundown, he fell into quiet slumber, waking only to recite a passage of scripture before bowing his head and taking leave of life. Diana and Mary wailed softly around him. I held his hand as he passed, murmuring, "My sister in Christ, guide me home." In the days that followed, I stayed at Moor House, guiding Diana and Mary through sorrow and tending to St. John's final affairs. I read to them from Shakespeare and from the Psalms, offering comfort. I realized then that I had gained a new family, not by blood, but by bonds of compassion and loss. Miss Temple's guiding words returned to me. In trials, the spirit finds its truest measure. I felt gratitude for my endurance and for the love I had received. Returning to Ferndean, I brought with me the letter confirming my inheritance's release. Though wealthy, I chose restraint. A portion of my fortune paid off Ferndean's small debts. Another purchased new school books and materials for local children in Hay and Morton, and a third endowed the Church Moravian Society in London. I reserved a share for the orphaned and the poor in Gateshead's parish, an homage to the child I once was. Mr. Rochester, now strong enough to walk with a cane, joined my enterprises. Together, we funded a wing at Lowood, where orphans received food, clothing, and warm lodgings, an echo of our past sufferings that we now sought to ease for others. Each morning I taught at the schoolhouse adjoining Hayes Church, reading, spelling, geography. Adele, now 16, prepared to finish her studies for boarding at a fashionable finishing school. Mr. Rochester, from his study, visited us each lunchtime, his face alight with pride as he watched the children recite their lessons. Occasionally, neighbors, once suspicious of Thornfield's secrets, called at Ferndean's door and offered apologies for past rumors. We greeted them with gentle forgiveness. The wounds of Thornfield now lay buried beneath the soil. One crisp autumn day, my Aunt Reed died, her final years haunted by remorse at her treatment of me. John Reed's line had ended. Eliza remained sheltered in an austere convent in Nunnery Wood. I traveled to Gateshead to claim my inheritance from Reed's estate and to distribute tokens of support to distant cousins. Upon my return to Ferndean, Rochester read aloud my aunt's last letter. Dear niece Jane, sought long for pardons and blessings. May the Lord reward your kind mercy. My cheeks warmed with both sorrow and relief. The past had yielded its last torturous threads. My future lay firmly clasped in love and forgiveness. On a mild winter morning, under Ferndean's mist-wreathed oaks, Mr. Rochester and I married before a small assembly of friends. Diana and Mary Rivers, the vicar of Hay, and Adele, now a young lady of 16 in pale blue silk. The winter sun, though faint, shone upon our clasped hands as I recited my vows. I, Jane Eyre Rochester, take thee, Edward Rochester, to be my husband, to cherish in hardship and joy, in darkness and in light, so long as we both shall live. His voice, hoarse with emotion, answered, and I, Edward Rochester Eyre, take thee, Jane Eyre, to be my wife. Adele placed a wreath of winter blooms upon my hair. We emerged into the frigid air, cold on our faces, our hearts ablaze with warmth. At Ferndine's doorway, Hannah presented a bowl of thick cider spiced with cinnamon, our only wedding feast, yet sweet beyond measure. That evening, by the hearth's glow, Rochester and I conversed of our shared pasts, his confessions of impatience, my declarations of renewal. He placed his hand gently on my cheek. My dear Jane, you have taught me how to love without pride. In you, I have found my equal, my guide, my salvation. I responded, my Edward, in you, I have found meaning beyond my orphaned years. Together, we have risen from ashes and despair. Together, we shall build a life of compassion and service. 10 years later, Ferndene Manor flourished as a modest but purposeful estate. We replaced the old trunks of apple trees with new grafts. Birds returned to roost among the branches, and wisteria vines climbed the stone walls. Our daughter, whose name we gave as Eyre Rivers, honoring both families, grew up by my side, reading under the elm trees as Adele tirelessly tutored her. She learned of Helen Burns's faith, of Lowood's trials, of Thornfield's blaze, and Morehouse's compassion. At 16, she was spirited and gentle, endowed with intellect and charity, an inheritance of heart more than wealth. St. John Rivers, though gone, remained a guiding presence in memory. Each year on his birthday, Diana and Mary and I visited his grave beneath the churchyard's yew. We placed a simple wreath, recited his favorite psalm, and pledged to serve others as he had. I often thought of his idealism, how, though misguided in seeking my hand, he had aspired to a life of devout purpose. His legacy manifested in the modest vicarage at Morton, where the poor found refuge and the children learned letters. At Lowood, the new headmistress, Miss Shaw, dedicated a wing in Helen Burns's name, Burns Hall, where young orphans found warmth and books and moral guidance. The rivers of my fortune, channeled through endowments, sustained Lowood's reforms. New kitchens for adequate meals, stables to house the sick, Protestant ministers of compassionate intent. I visited each year, observing students now garbed in warm woolens, playing in sunlit quadrangles rather than shivering in icy dormitories. At Thornfield's ruins, the charred brick walls still stood sentinel, obscured by overgrown roses and ivy. But I bore no desire to rebuild what sorrow had claimed. Rather, I planted wildflowers between the stones, a memorial to Bertha Mason's torment and my own liberation. Here once burned pride and prejudice, here now bloom hope and forgiveness. Villagers spoke of Thornfield with hushed reverence, a house where ghosts had walked, but where love had triumphed in the end. Once I had feared ghosts, now I cherished the memory of all who once dwelt within. As winter's first snow fell upon Ferndean, Rochester and I sat by the hearth, eyelids heavy as smoke curled upward from logs. He held my hand, weathered but strong. I rested my head upon his shoulder. Adele, now a young woman, played a classical sonata in the drawing room, her melody a soothing balm to the hush of night. By candlelight, I read aloud the final pages of Shakespeare's sonnets, permitting his immortal words to lull us toward sleep. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, nor bends with the remover to remove. Rochester's one good eye met mine, his voice soft as snow upon the earth. In truth, Jane, our hearts were never sundered. Through trials and separation, we have found a marriage of true minds. Now, at last, I find rest in you. As his words wove warmth through the chill, I closed the book, feeling a timeless calm. In the silent glow of the hearth and the hush of falling snow, I whispered, Edward, in you I am home. Thus ends the tale of Jane Eyre, orphaned and bespoke by suffering, tempered by trials of fire and frost, and finally clasped in the gentle hands of love and forgiveness. In the vast sweep of life, through Gateshead's cruelty, Lowood's austerity, Thornfield's passion and ruin, Morehouse's compassion, and Ferndean's quiet redemption, we see the indomitable power of the human spirit. For though the trials of pride and prejudice may scar our souls, through faith and steadfast resolve, each heart may at last say, Here at last I am at home.